All right, so our talk is entitled Ground Truth. Yes, that's a picture of a mortar and a pestle. Keep it in mind. We'll get back to it later. We've already heard about us, so thank you, Christina. Important thing to note at the bottom, yes, we're married. This is important to note because a lot of people don't know, and then they get confused and mildly taken aback when we whack each other and talk over each other.
We even have children and everything. So
this will be a very conversational talk. So be prepared for some back and forth and some chit chat. Generally speaking, Mike loves AI more than I do. And so be prepared to hear some
let me
back chat.
One thing. This talk is much more of a why talk than a how talk. We'll talk about this later, but position your mind to think about what we are doing is we are trying to ask great questions rather than give you specific techniques. All right. But first,
to start off, why did we write the same book 4 times? This is the book, Welcome to Observing the User Experience, 3rd edition.
Really? Okay.
The 3rd edition is supposed to come out next year.
Yeah, it's...
Elsevier delayed it multiple times,
but
please look for it, pre-order it, tell all your friends to pre-order it, tell your professors to put it in their classes, do all the things that we would like you to do.
Oh, right. You're going to go...
I forget to say that I think this is literally the single best book on user research that you can buy, and I'm not making that up. I wouldn't
Thank you.
I didn't believe that was true.
You know, we actually, I don't want to say we think so too, but definitely, so one of the things that I want to point out is that one of the reasons why this is a why talk is that the writing of the book, each edition, kind of articulates and canonizes the relationship that we as the authors have to what we do as researchers and where we think the profession is going as a whole. And so the first one came out in 2003. That was written by Mike alone. And that was Mike kind of making sense of this new discipline, this new career that he found himself in. There weren't a whole lot of user researchers who called themselves that out there. And in a lot of ways, it was Mike writing the textbook that he wished he'd had and that no one could give him. Then, in 2012, yes, I know, 9 years later, the next edition comes out. At this point, we're married. I've been teaching this very book at Berkeley in a graduate class on user research for a couple years.
I will say was selected independent of them selecting Liz as the person to teach the class, which was very awkward.
So awkward. So awkward.
Anyway, all right, yes.
Teaching a book that is written by your then boyfriend to a class of students is just horribly embarrassing. But in it, so we got to the second edition, and I was like, you know, I don't think this first edition is really working. Like there are specific things that I need to say about what it is to be a professional user researcher in at that point 2010 that need to be articulated because this is a textbook and I've been teaching it and I feel a responsibility to the next generation.
That's the second edition.
That's the second edition. Looks a little different, same general cover theme. I was all set to write the 3rd edition. And I was, in fact, midway through writing the 3rd edition.
This is approximately 2019. So our publisher came to us about 5 years, 7 years after the first one, 6 years, and said, hey, we need a third edition. We said, yeah, great. And then Liz started writing it because she's the lead author now. I wrote the original.
And at that point, I'd been managing a team of designers and researchers, so I had even more settled opinions about how I thought things should happen and what was working and what wasn't. And then the pandemic happened, and there was chaos, and we had 2 small children, and we basically told our publisher to go away until the suffering stopped. And by the time our publisher came back and the suffering had stopped and we were all ready to pick it up again, AI happened. And we realized, this was about 6 months, I think, after the first big release of the first big models.
Yeah, so like basically, we wrapped up writing it in like 2022, so this is 4 years ago. And then GPT-4 comes out. We're like, oh, we should probably do something different, and or GPT-3 at this point. Then, anyway, to make a long story short, like ChatGPT comes out, everything, and we realized that we needed to rewrite the book that we had just rewritten.
And it's 1,000 pages.
Yeah, it's 1,000-page book. Like, let me just.
And every single chapter was touched by both the switch to remote work during the pandemic, but also by AI. And so we overhauled the whole thing.
This is 100% not our cover. Our publisher gave us this. They gave us a choice of covers. This is the ugliest one.
This is the ugliest, but it's bright yellow, which is good. And so it's coming soon. It took us another few years to grapple with it and rewrite 1,000 pages and get clear about where we thought the field's going.
Yes, so this talk is based on what we learned rewriting the book over the last couple of years about what user experience research is and how it works in the modern AI era as we did this. So, should I do this?
Yes.
All right. So, what we're going to talk about is the confluence of these trends today. So, essentially, UX practice as a discipline has really changed. There's all these new tools, there's all these new developments, there's all these new behaviors, there's all this new stuff that's out there. And so the actual practice of user research has deeply changed. 1. 2, we have seen major shift in the power dynamics. We talk a lot about power dynamics, which is literally about like the power of the giant corporation versus the person who's working for the giant corporation versus the person who they are trying to make a product for. We talk a lot about the power dynamics because they have shifted a lot, and we think it's really important to make that explicit and to discuss it, because that's a thing that historically never got talked about. No one ever told you when you were a UX or when you were an HCI undergrad that when you're working for one of the big companies, you are a cog in a machine, and this is how you have to be that cog if you want to work for those companies. And so we want to talk about that. And then the third thing is obviously the technology has blown up. And so, so that's what this talk is about, is how these three things kind of influence each other at the same time in this moment in history. All right. On that note, this is me, right? Mm-hmm. All right. So how has the technology changed? So as we know, AI is like this. It's like this tidal wave that goes through, and like if you've ever seen pictures of tidal waves, like it's not like a single wave like you see in the pictures where it's like a big wave and then it's over. A tidal wave, when you see it hit, it's not that big, but then it keeps going and going and going, and what that does is that keeps pulling everything along and mashing it up, and that's what we're in the middle of right now. So, first thing is obviously that we have all these technologies, all these tools. So what we did when we revised the book is we just dropped a bunch of methods from it because they're just simply better tools. In the first edition and the second edition, we talked about transcription and how do you do it and when do you do it and what do you do. It's free now, free. Transcribe everything. Like record and transcribe everything. We talked about how to do, how to code those transcripts when you're reading them, mark up the quotes you want, and kind of do concordance. Forget about it. It's all okay. We disagree. So preliminary analysis of those recordings and transcripts. You can have something else do it. You can have something do your video editing. You can have a translation. You can use Notebook LM with all your transcripts. That's the Google tool for those of you who don't need, to get kind of ground truth, like when and what transcript did somebody say, talk about this. So really, like, the model is actually pretty good at writing first drafts of discussion guides. They're pretty good at it. One of the funny things is that I actually had a model just do this a couple days ago, and it regurgitated something that looked almost exactly like things from our book. So that was kind of exciting. We were like, oh, right, it's us.
We're in the Anthropic settlement.
It's like that. Yeah, we are in fact in the Anthropic settlement. So, and so like it writes, you can get pretty good survey questions. You can get, first draft of all kinds of things. All right. So remote research tools are awesome. You get prototyping tools. These are okay. All right. So all of this stuff is essentially taking existing practices and automating them and making them faster, making them easier. And that is on the whole a good thing.
Except.
However, this is a thing we never had to deal with when we wrote the first two editions. The thing is that, user experience is about getting ground truth. It's about actually getting the ground truth of like human beings and their experience and their actual genuine experience. And what we have now, thanks to all of these AI tools, we have hyperscaled our fraud. We have every single thing that you can think about that can be faked is being faked. Survey answers. People, we've had conversations with people where they talk about the fact, you've probably heard this about job interviews, where they've interviewed somebody who says that they're a stockbroker and that you've recruited them and they've answered all the stockbroker questions, and you get on the video call with them and you're asking them questions and there's this like pause in between the answers. And then the person who's the interviewer realizes, oh, you're just reading off of a ChatGPT screen. You don't actually know anything about this. And so that, kind of how to deal with that has become like a major problem. And so our advice about that, we don't have like this advice. This like we wrote this deck like a month ago. This is probably already out of date. But our advice is that you do continuous verification of people during screening, and then you keep probing them for anomalies. You ask them questions that are like, oh, so you say that you're from Belgium, and you ask them like a politics question about recent politics, and if they can't answer it, then they're probably faking, or there's a lot of ways. You ask harder questions. You ask specific questions. It's
delay payment.
Oh yeah.
Do not auto pay people.
Do not pay subjects until you are sure that they're not lying to you.
Basically, what we're suggesting is like zero trust security, right? Like continuous verification.
For UX.
Do zero trust vetting for participants.
Yeah. All right. So this is the thing.
This is the money slide, everybody.
I don't know. So this is the thing that when I was trying to put this together, I was like, okay, let's now talk about what is actually happening in terms of AI and UX research. So you have these two axes, essentially fake versus real users and fake versus real researchers. And so you can have something in each one of those quadrants. And there are, in fact, startups in each one of those quadrants. And so, and what I will say is that actually simulated and synthetic users actually have, and personas have a place in research for certain things. They can identify basic requirements. They can identify basic behaviors. They can also give you access to some perspectives that are really difficult to recruit for. There are some groups of people that you're just not going to be able to find very many of to talk to. The problem is that whatever you learn from these models is guaranteed to be wrong in some details. The way I'm kind of describing this is like these models give you anti-alias reality. They give you like reality with the corners, with the corners rounded off. So let me talk about researchers. So synthetic researchers, they can ask questions for you. They can ask questions of people for you. But then you are back in that place where you have to trust them to ask the questions that are going to actually generate answers, and that the people they're talking to are real people who are generating real answers. Otherwise, you have two AI models, and you might as well just like do simulated research. One of the things about that also, about both, is that the models are trained on specific corpuses. And there are certain groups who are very well documented in Reddit, whose opinions and views and behaviors and preferences are very well documented online. Great.
Cool.
Yeah. But
Let's
there are
say
lots of people whose behaviors are not. And those are the behaviors, and those are the people that you actually want to know about.
So let me give you an example.
Yes.
I work with largely healthcare policy specialists who have excruciating amounts of detailed knowledge about very specific parts of US healthcare law, which is notoriously painfully complicated. You would think that these people would be, because they're online, because they're in a wealthy industrialized country, that there would be a whole lot that you could ask an LLM about how they do their work. Not so. They do all of their work behind government firewalls. Any conventional LLM will know nothing about what they do, how they do it, or how they feel about it. And that really gets, I think, to the heart of one of the big, you don't know what you don't know, that is very risky about the all AI method, is that we have a lot of assumptions often about who populations are, what they're like. And, in the past, I've sort of used an example here of Mongolian tour guides. We actually know a guy who's a Mongolian tour guide. His life experience isn't necessarily all that well documented because most of it's in, frankly, Chinese and Mongolian and Russian. And so if you have a English language LLM, it's not really going to get to it. But that kind of exotifies the problem, right? Like that makes the LLM problem sort of out there. Whereas my problem, like the normal LLM problem, is in here, in the United States, in people who you probably know if you take public health classes. It's not like somehow you're going to be safe to use AI if you're working with US-based populations or highly internet-connected groups. It may be that you're actually asking about a part of their lives that is simply walled off from the corpus of LLM-generated personas.
And this is why you need ground truth. And this is why you need what we're calling, quote unquote, traditional user research, where you actually talk to people. Maybe you even go to where they live and you talk to them. You pet their dog. You sit down with them. You learn about them. You learn about their kids. You learn about things you don't care about, but that are important to them. This is why you still have that, because that helps you test your conclusions. It's an external validation of research you may have already done through other means, which we absolutely encourage you to do. Don't do the most expensive kind. It's expensive. Don't do the most expensive kind of research first, but do it anyway, because you're going to need to identify whether all the other research you did is valid, and you're going to need to identify what the edge cases are, and you're going to need to collect stories. And so you're going to need to collect stories because of organizational power. And we're going to talk about that, I think, in a few minutes.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So what we recommend is that from a pragmatic perspective, that say you're in a startup, say you're doing a completely new thing, you're incredibly busy, like everyone's working 12-hour days. You can in fact use these automated tools, and we recommend that you do. But we also recommend that on a regular cadence, you go out and talk to people. You prepare for it. You prepare for it by making discussion guides. You prepare for it by looking at the results that you have. You prepare for it by looking at by reading about how you look at things. There's plenty of stuff out there. Like, this is why this is a why talk, not a how talk. There's so much out there about how to do all this stuff. It'll, of course, also be in our book, and it'll, of course, when our book comes out, it will train the LLMs, and so you'll be able to get it out of Claude without you having to read our book. However, this is why it's important. This is why you do that. And so the power dynamics comes in because you need to have, because the ground truth has meaning in an organizational context, not just in a research context. All right. Is this you?
Yes. So we're going to talk a little bit about how UX research role, how the role has changed within the broader tech industry. And to do that, we have to talk about organizational power. And I want to be clear that we're not going to get nostalgic for, I don't know, the halcyon days of 2015 or whatever. But we do need to acknowledge that the world has changed. And that's a big part of why I want to do this, why we wanted to rewrite the book, is that it's not new. You know, there's always a temptation to, the opposite of nostalgia is kind of presentism, where we sort of believe that everything that happens today is new and unprecedented and revolutionary. And that is just not true. Maybe the technology is very new, but the experiences that people have as they watch their jobs change, the emotions they feel, the decisions they have to make, have happened before, and you can learn from them.
Auto workers in the 1980s when robots came around. Right?
Exactly. And so this quote comes from The Automation of Knowledge from Lewis Mumford, 1970. The ideas date back to the 1930s, and they were probably updated in the 1950s based on the then new definition of cybernetics. And if someone here is a symbolic systems major, and that is the genesis of the symbolic systems major at Stanford as we have now. So you can trace a bright line from this to this. And so it's happened again, right? It's happened before, it'll happen again. And so what we try to say is that AI is a symptom. It's not a cause. And what I mean by that, what we mean by that, is that it's a symptom of a longer evolution of who has power, whose job is seen to be automatable. So when we say power, we mean the ability to shape the world, either through what happens or through what doesn't happen. So you can see power in what relevance is treated, like how is relevance defined? What skills are seen as salient or even comprehensible? Back in the day, I had a job working with a bunch of computational economists in a research lab. And my background in anthropology and social science was vaguely comprehensible to them, but it was not seen as salient to them in any way. So if I raised a question in a seminar or I asked about their product testing plans, I was met with like blank stares, glass wall. And I remember thinking, I have no power here. Like I am a representative of a discipline that does not count. Okay, cool.
You still have to have that job. You still have to figure out how to make a change.
Yeah, like I still have to figure out something to do, but it's not going to be through this route of trying to appeal to people who do not see my work as meaningful. Then there's also reward and rejection. So as I've said, like, what gets you rewarded, depending on your definition of reward? How do other people get rewarded or rejected? Who gets laid off? Who gets a bigger salary? Who gets to make decisions in sprint planning? Who gets to speak? Here. Those are all forms of reward, and reward for the economists in the audience, I know there's one, is revealed choice, right? It's revealed preference. You can see it happening. This is not like up in the sky imaginary power dynamics. It's very real.
what I wanted to point out here in this chart that I actually had ChatGPT make for me.
Thanks, Mike.
The data was out there in layoffs.fyi, but what I want to point out is that, like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of layoffs right now. We hear a lot about layoffs, but actually the layoffs started. The layoffs started before ChatGPT actually became a big deal. Like the companies were already laying people off, and this was like there was like a previous hump a couple of years earlier during the pandemic, but like. What we're seeing now is essentially like a justification of AI, as you probably heard, as a reason to just continue business as usual for a lot of these organizations.
So when you see layoffs and you hear someone say, AI did it,
yeah.
Obviously, never trust what a CEO is telling you about their company in public. Like, just don't, right? Like, they're doing this for the stock prices and they're doing it for the business analysts. But also, the data contradicts it. And what that means is that the layoffs are indicative. They're a symptom of something else that's going on. And it can be multi-causal. Like, we know that situations in the world have many factors that play into them. But the story that we're being given of AI as a sole cause or business efficiencies as a sole cause is just not true. And however, they're really scary. They're really unsettling. There's a lot of panicked discussion on LinkedIn and Medium about the death of design and the death of UX, and that is completely understandable. You know, it happens every time jobs get automated. And historically, let's talk about historically, it was robotics. It was manual labor. And so jobs that were the 3D, this is what I learned in grad school about what gets automated.
By the way, how many people know this framing, the 3D robotics framing? Okay. So this is a classic robotics and industrial operations engineering kind of consideration. Like, where do you stick a robot? That's where you stick a robot, right? You stick a robot when you have a task that's that. That's where it's been.
Where do you replace a human?
Right.
Where do you get rid of humans? And
can I explain the upper right-hand corner, which is actually, yes. I did that, and it's really, I realize it makes no sense to anybody.
Okay, sure.
So what I want to say there is that unless you were going to get to this, is that what we're seeing right now is that we're seeing a lot of, like, the perspective that we are taking on this is that there are roles, there are activities, there are titles, and those are not the same thing. And so when you hear about UX, when you hear about research, that is not necessarily associated with a specific person or a specific title. And what we're seeing is we are seeing automation taking away essentially the activities for some of these things, and but not necessarily taking away either the roles or the tasks, and moreover not taking away the people, because because the responsibility of a person in a role is much greater than a specific activity that they do. And their role in an organization can be much different than that activity. All right.
So, for example, UX research came up with this, I find, incredibly infelicitous acronym, PWDR, person who does research. I know. And they had to come up with this acronym because there are so many people in startups, in medium, like all over the place, who are very clearly doing research as researchers define it, the systematic investigation of the world and the derivation of knowledge from it according to general theories. People are doing that. They don't call themselves researchers, but it's happening. And the same thing is now happening to engineering. There are just all sorts of people writing code who would not describe themselves as engineers, who are not called engineers, who do not want to be called engineers, but they're still doing it. And the same thing for interaction design.
Yeah, right now you'll see people are trying to scoot around the title thing, and they're going like, "Oh no, we're builders." Like that's what we're builders.
We're technologists.
We're not engineers anymore because the AI does that. We're not UX researchers because the AI does that. What we are is we're builders. Like,
Fine.
I think a point that I wanted to make here is that the thing that AI does repeatedly, or any automation technology does, is it takes a job that is repetitive and that is considered to be low value, and what that is, it shifts and it moves that to a machine. It's always done that. It's done that since whatever. Manchester cotton mills in the 1840s or whatever. Like, if what you're doing is repetitive, you have to do it multiple times, and okay, thanks. And an organization can wrap a name around that, they will automate.
And so what we're leaning towards now is this 3E framework. And take this with a grain of salt. We're evolving this, but I think it's a necessary complication to the dirty, dangerous, dull framework, because what we're seeing now is essentially the automation via AI of knowledge work that is seen as expensive. So you have to hire a separate researcher with benefits and everything to do this work.
And it takes what? Not 45 seconds?
It takes weeks. You might have to wait for results. Unthinkable. And external, that is to say, do I really need to hire this external person? Is it really important to product development to have a separate person? Do I really need to have a separate person to be a good product manager? Maybe I can just do this thing myself because it's not deeply part of my job. It's, kind of secondary. And so extraneous, right? You can separate it and you can kind of pull it out and plop it down into automation because it's seen as repetitive or lower value. The question then becomes, though, and this is why we keep talking about power dynamics, who defines extraneous, expensive, and internal? I feel pretty darn cheap. I feel pretty central. I think my work is not repetitive at all. But I'm not the one who gets to define, in terms of a large organization, what is or is not central. So instead, what we see is more user research, paradoxically. Lots and lots of research is happening, but fewer people might have that title. We have fewer kind of disciplinary specialties. So if you've ever looked at somebody who worked for Google, if you've ever looked at Google, they have these amazing career ladders that are like qualitative researcher 6. Or 3, and that's what I mean by a disciplinary specialty versus a broader shared organizational competency, where you might expect that multiple people share the quantitative research responsibility. It becomes a culture rather than a title. And then, of course, as I said, PWDRs, all these different places where things that to me are recognizably research are happening, and I would hope that they are happening better. So what we see, again, thinking about our book, was that in the second edition of our book, what we saw is the rise of discount methods, right?
Yeah, first edition, do everything by hand. Second edition, the expectations are that you're going to you're going to do it faster, and you're going to do more of it. So you started to see discount research.
Guerrilla research, it was called sometimes. And then you see around, this is all very hand-wavy.
Yeah.
But, think about it. You have the amount of time up top, 2 months, 60 days. And it took a while, right, around the early 2000s. The time goes down via the discount methods and the expectation that you're going to send, maybe a month, maybe 20 days. Now, what we're getting down to is this expectation that AI can do it, maybe, through one of these synthetic users or synthetic researchers, and it will take days, if not hours, to get the same results.
All right.
So this is we're going to try and wrap this up quickly so we can have a conversation. And this is the end of the, are there still careers in research? Y'all are mostly students. Maybe you're expecting to have a career in research. You're probably expecting to have some sort of career, I hope. And our book is for you, even if you're not going to be a researcher. So we want to have a conversation about what it means to do this work going forwards as a professional, not a hobbyist, not someone who does it for funsies on the weekend, but someone for whom this might be a component, if not the principal component, of your working life. And let me take a step back, though, because I feel like an old. So I graduated from college in 1998, and back then, the traditional career procession. Well, there wasn't really a career. Let's be honest. We were making it up. But for about 10 years, the career progression was kind of guild-like, very artisanal. You'd begin and you'd become an apprentice under a mid-level manager. And the mid-level manager was like a journeyman, right, who supervised and taught groups of apprentices, under the head of research, someone like Christina here, who would be kind of the overseer who would guide and lead the entire culture of research and set standards and coordinate work. Or, like Mike was, you could be an independent consultant. You'd hustle. You just hustle, hustle, hustle. And a lot of the advances in our profession were made by people who hustled. So I don't disrespect it at all. Today, okay, this is like a little hand wavy. I haven't done a statistical analysis of Glassdoor or anything like that. But through a lot of interviews and a lot of talking to people who are kind of at the head of level, what we see is that entry-level designers / researchers are people who wear multiple hats. They can do a lot of different things. They're a generalist. And there are fewer people, obviously, who are specifically doing research. Product managers have taken over that mid-level journeyman, tell the apprentices what to do role.
And so I don't know if we talk about this later. I don't remember. So product managers, the title is an interestingly ambiguous title. UX researcher gives an organization very specific bounds around what that role is.
Quantitative researcher 5.
Your job is. You are talking about user experience, which is a part of design, possibly, or marketing, possibly. And you are talking about research, so you are doing research. You're going to be... Product management has none of those. There are no prerequisites for calling yourself a PM. And thus, PMs have taken over the power structure of Silicon Valley. The title of PM has essentially subsumed all of these other titles, not just in terms of the kind of work that they do, but in terms of the power that they have within organizations. So one of the, if you want a small piece of advice, call yourself a PM, right? Because, but
no one can prove you wrong.
Yeah, no one can tell you you're not.
This is what I say to designers now, too.
But do the user research, because that can also be part of the PM umbrella. The PM bubble will burst at some point because whatever, it always happens. And somebody else, builders will take over, whatever. Just think about that as what is it that you are doing when you are in these roles, and PMs can do a lot. And should be doing a lot of research, even if they're not. All right.
So, this is sort of a set of maxims that we can leave you with, no matter what you call yourself. We genuinely do not care what you call yourself at this point. One, we've talked about this, that ground truth is like gold, not like flowers. And that's why we had our mortar and pestle, right? You have to mine it, you have to refine it, you have to shine it up, you have to make it pretty. It's not just a flower. You don't go out and just pick a research insight up. And that work that you put into it is really meaningful, right? Like, I'm going to skip actually over and say, like, one of the great fallacies we both believe of a lot of these AI-enabled research tools, and also a lot of AI-enabled design tools in general, is they sort of think of the deliverable as the outcome, right? Like, oh, you made a wireframe, you're done. That's what your job is. Or you made a research report, that's what your job is. That is not actually true. If you think about the actual power dynamics, I did my dissertation on this in technology and sociology, so I'm willing to fight for it. If you are, in fact, a working professional, you know that just like sending out your report into the void does not do anything. You have to think of a report or a wireframe as a kind of contract between all the people who helped to make it. It's like, I'm going to look at you, and I'm going to be like, all right, like, we looked each other in the eye, and we agree that this journey is an important journey, and that there are some bright spots, and there are some pain points, and we agree that the worst pain point is that one, and we're going to work on that one.
And we both know that because you made this, you understand what's in it. The deliverable is essentially a contract between two people that says the person who's delivering it actually did the work and knows the information. You can get an AI to generate a perfectly reasonable deliverable, but then it is not a valid social contract between you or whoever makes that deliverable and whoever receives that deliverable, because there is not this relationship that says this is actually based in ground truth.
So
ground truth is what gives the deliverable its organizational power.
I saw a question.
Yeah, and I'm curious about this because I feel like before this point, it was a lot harder to create a deliverable, to create the outcome. Because without that implicit understanding, like even if maybe you were the head of a research team, somebody in your research team had the understanding, and in theory, you would know who. Like so, but now, so that contract kind of wasn't necessary to question that before.
Exactly, because it was hard to make. That meant that because it was expensive, that essentially meant that a lot of work and thought had gone into it, and that was the validation of that product. So what you would do, like in the oldie days, is of UX research, is that you put together like a big binder full of all of your interviews and all of your stuff, and you would deliver that to your client, and there would be an executive summary at the front. They would never look at a single sheet of that binder, but that would validate the executive summary that you made, because they knew that if you had gone through all the work to collect all this information, they would believe you that was that the conclusions were done. Similarly, if you make a design, if you're a UX designer, if you are a visual designer, if you produce a design that clearly has to be done by hand, then that means you stand behind the decisions that were made when that deliverable was done. If you have something else generate that, there's no guarantee on the other side for them. And this is not necessarily going to be a conscious thing towards the people that you talk to. It's a power dynamic thing. They're not going to give it as much value if they know that it was generated by an AI.
Or, I mean, quite literally. So I do a lot of facilitative group exercises. And yes, it's research, because I work with a lot of people whose work practices are very poorly documented. But also, it is there to establish a relation of gratitude and trust. I talk to you, you tell me about your work. We have that like eye to eye. Then you get to see that work. Even if you didn't make the deliverable, you know that I was there, I talked to you, you see your words, you are now a part, like quite literally, a part of this deliverable, and you have to take some ownership of it. Even if you don't feel like you're the owner, you've been incorporated into it. And that's a really valuable power hack, right? You are showing people that they have been heard. And if you have, it's not even if you have an AI-generated deliverable, just the suspicion of it starts to creep in. Was that a real person you talked to or not? Are those real quotes? Did you make them up? Like, so much of what we did as researchers, for better or for worse, depended on this aura of authenticity and reality. And when you disrupt it, you start dislodging some of the credibility that your conclusions have. It's like, imagine if I showed someone a log file, like just one of those, I don't know, Google Analytics generated files, and we talked about it for hours, and at the end of it I said, hey, you know what? I had ChatGPT make that for me. Nothing in it is real. That is a massive betrayal of a kind of work social contract, and it's something that anyone could do at any time.
So I want to talk about
Yes.
this a little bit. So one of the things that we recommend to everyone is that user research is the practice of understanding the perspective of someone else, the perspective of another person, what success looks like to them, what failure looks like to them, what they want, what they don't want. Do that with the internal stakeholders of the companies that you work for. Understand, use the same user research tools conceptually that you would use to understand someone outside of your organization, to understand your own organization, in order to understand how to be successful within that organization. What does that senior vice president need in order for them to be successful? Can I, using my position, using the work that I'm doing, can I help them be more successful because they value this? And this is how you get past the 3E problem.
You are now you are not extraneous, you are not external, you are central. And that furthermore, I know you did this, I'll tell a story about you. Mike did this hack when he was working for a massive Scandinavian company that shall not be named, who communicated internally exclusively in giant PowerPoints.
Yeah. No one ever delivered the PowerPoints. They're literally just mailed to each other. Like, everyone just emailed each other PowerPoints all the time.
So Mike realized that his only way to talk to a bunch of these very powerful people was to make PowerPoint slides that could be easily copied and pasted into these giant documents and that were kind of infinitely reusable and remixable. And so he just sat down and designed slides that could be copied without attribution to him.
Yep. If they were stolen, awesome. That means my ideas are out there. And it'll for the most part, come back to me. So great, go steal my PowerPoint.
Right?
And people did.
Yeah, I've done something similar with emails in organizations that only do emails. You have to make emails that are easily forwarded and digested into the words that people need to hear.
It's exactly the same technique that we recommend when you're interviewing people. Use their words when you're talking to them. Like, if someone is calling something a different word than what you would call it, just use their word when you're talking to them, because that keeps everyone focused. That keeps the context on the conversation. That helps them understand what you're talking about. You do the same thing when you're communicating inside an organization. Don't try to make them understand what user experience research terminology is or methodology is.
They do not care.
Yeah.
They really don't. It's sort of a terrible irony of being a researcher. I am obviously someone who loves research. I got a PhD. Nobody wants to hear the names of methods. Nobody cares about my methods. Like, they want to know that they happened and that they're legitimate and I'm not making this stuff up. But researchers are the only ones who want to hear about other researchers and how they work. Instead, you have to, as Mike said, speak very directly to the needs and goals of the people that you're working for. And I know this sounds basic. I feel like I'm giving you this advice and you're like, yeah, Liz. But it's really hard in practice. And it's especially really hard if you're using large language models. because the large language models do not understand your organizational context. They are deliberately generic. So unless you have trained your own large language model on an incredibly deep corpus, which you can, like if you worked for like Amazon, you could totally give enough documents, enough corporate speak documents to that LLM to train it to talk like an Amazon executive. Most of us, I don't know, Stanford, but like most of us, like if you work at a startup or if you work at like a niche thing like I do with healthcare policy, there are not enough documents to train a normal model to talk like the experts I work with. And when I have tried to get frontier models to do that, they are extremely poor quality. And I don't blame them because that's the corpus. So your job using these skills is to at least make sure, even if you draft something with the help of whatever model or tool, that it is still speaking the niche cultural vocabulary of your specific organization and its specific context. Because getting back to the technological capabilities, you cannot expect, sorry, I'm going to yell, but like really, you cannot expect a large language model to talk in the correct terms for your specific moment in time and place, particularly if you are designing something that is so new it has never existed before. There can be no expectation that the LLM will be able to predict that because it doesn't exist yet. So if you're inventing the future, please do not rely on a corpus built from the past. The end.
Good. Bing.
Bing.
Oh, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Questions? We end with more Mumford, always. Do we have time?
Yeah, you got 7 minutes of questions.
Awesome.
So let's go.
We rushed through so we could get through the questions part.
All right. Oh, wait. I have one more slide to show.
Oh, you do?
I do. I used the wrong presenter view. Okay, fine. Yay. All right. So I, with Claude, vibe coded a synthetic open source user interview tool that essentially is written entirely in Python, so it works on everything. So what this does, just so you know, it's very basic. There is a set of personas in one document. There is a research, essentially guide, a set of questions for the researcher in another document. And then there is a list of essentially AI models. And if you have API keys to those AI models, and really it just uses what you can do is you can have one AI model act as the interviewer, and one AI model acts as the interviewee. It randomizes who does what every session, compiles the answers, and then summarizes it at the end. So you can essentially run it's a very basic fake set of external interviews. And what I recommend you do is do not pretend that this is a real substitute, but it's a toy you can play with that it gives you an idea of how of what these AI models do and how they do it. So there you go.
God, I'm horrified.
It was so fun vibe coding that thing.
Hey. So Gartner, like a little while ago, came up with this very provocative claim that in 2 years, 80% of data that is going to be used to train a lot of the foundation models that many companies are trying to build is going to be synthetic. I was wondering how that, if we believe at least some part of that trend hype that they're kind of pointing to, how does that fit with some of the things that you were saying?
That is a amazing confirmation, basically, of what we are. I like to think it's an amazing confirmation of what we just said, which is that if the models eat themselves, you're getting further and further away from empirical validation of core bets. So I'm assuming that a lot of people here want to make products. I work with people who make policy. It's actually not that different. You're making a bet, a very expensive bet sometimes. And people like to think that code is cheap, which is sometimes true, but reputation is expensive. And runway is expensive. And if you make a really bad bet based on totally synthetic data, talking to totally synthetic data, you've essentially just, oh gosh, I don't know how to say this without swearing. You've eaten your own BS. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Enjoyed the talk. Given that issue, and also given the diffusion of the UX researcher task among the many roles that you just explained to us, how do you convince somebody of the quality of a piece of user experience research? How do you do that? How do you tell them it's not based on this and these people don't really know what they're doing because they only do it part-time? How do you validate that value?
I mean, it's an excellent question, and it's like it's like, how do you justify your work to an organization that may think that it is automatable? I think that's the question. I think that's a big question. I think honestly. That's where going out and petting people's dogs, like collecting some ground truth, is actually has a lot of rhetorical power, rhetorical value. Like, look, I took a selfie with this person in their kitchen, right? Thus, when I tell you that Susie actually does this thing that you thought that no one would ever do. I'm telling you that there's at least one person I can tell you why she did it. And then that gives you rhetorical. Really.
It actually gets back to an amazing piece of advice given to me when I was just starting out in research by Genevieve Bell, who some of you may know about as a very well-known research advocate. And Genevieve told me that I should always take a picture of myself doing the research, if possible, wearing a brightly colored shirt so that I stand out from the background, and make sure that it is in the presentation, because that is the, like in crypto, it's like the proof of work.
Genevieve also did it. She has some amazing, so she was at Intel for years. She has some amazing hacks for getting herself, not herself, but really like her work seen. And she made a lot of, ended up having a lot of influence at Intel. She had only one time that when she was talking to essentially C-level people at Intel, she walked over and she was making a point about, I'm not sure what but there were stickers involved. She brings some stickers that they essentially talk about. And she picks up a sticker and she's walking along, and she walks over to the CEO of Intel. And she's talking to him and she's peeling a sticker. She closes her laptop and she puts his laptop. She closes his laptop so he has to look at her. And then she puts her sticker on it. And then she continues talking and walks away.
Wow.
That is essentially someone who, that's...
Owns her power.
Exactly. I don't recommend it in all situations, but in that situation...
yes.
It got the CEO's attention.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's a question over there.
I was going to ask, to what extent do you think finding ground truth from the communities you need to hear it most from will become more and more difficult because they are guarding said ground truth so it doesn't injure the product itself? I say that from a perspective of I'm working with a range of tribal nations that are pulling back from this. Projects that are incorporating AI, there are misperceptions, there's a misunderstanding of benefit, but also real concerns about data sovereignty.
And I think so it's funny you should say that, because the sort of the gold metaphor of ground truth is a very ambivalent one, right? Like, mining is an extractive industry. It often destroys the landscapes that it pulls from, and that is in some ways the history of user research, is that you come in, you ask these questions, companies benefit from the lived experience of the people who have spoken to you, and then they don't actually get a penny or even credit in the final product. And I think tribal nations are especially interesting because there are real sovereignty issues, and particularly around certain kinds of genetic or cultural information. And I think insofar as that makes research harder, I think that's a good thing. Like, friction is a good thing. There is no law that says somehow, or no moral right that says that you should be able to ask anyone a question and they have to answer it, and that somehow they are unethical or wrong if they say no, right? Like, this is sort of the foundation of trauma-informed research, where you cannot go. One of the reasons why I would recommend using synthetic personas is if you're planning to do research, let's say with like people undergoing cancer treatment, perhaps it's not a great time to take your untested interview protocol and just try asking them about their emotions.
So a couple of thoughts. One of the important roles that UX or whoever is doing, like people who do research, is that they learn to understand the audiences and how and what helps the audience trust the organization to be able to deliver certain kinds of services that it wants to deliver to those audiences. That is literally the responsibility. And for difficult to reach audiences, it's hard. But if the goal is to create something, like basically, if the entire business model or organizational model is based on delivering something to that population, that is critical knowledge in order to be able to be successful at the thing that is trying that you're trying to do. All right, so
I think that's going to have to be the final question. But thank you, and thank our guests for giving an amazing talk.